hello and welcome to this special session at the sidelines of Nasscom Technology Leadership Forum 2024. Well, the topic that we have at our hand today is something which is very thought-provoking and I'm sure has been discussed at various levels across the boardrooms and the chat rooms and meeting rooms across all the companies and the representatives that are sitting here. And the topic is, are tech value chains resilient to global headwinds? It's very pertinent right now because not only 40 major economies are going through elections this year, Europe and the borders of Europe are at war for the last couple of years. There's supply chains which are getting disrupted in tangible and intangible ways. And of course, the entire debate about soft landing and hard landing, which I'm sure has the purse strings of a lot of your clients a bit stuck, right? So in that context, of course, we'll try and decode in parts in terms of how the tech value chains are really evolving, and who better than, of course, the battery of guests that I have with me, Puneet from Microsoft, Sindhu from SAP Labs, as well as Sandip from IBM, to discuss all of that. Let me actually throw it open and talk to you, Puneet, first. From the demand side of things, the most important bit, right? How are client conversations changing? Are they probably looking at more shorter term, deals which are very focused on cost optimizations, or they're looking at long-term transformations as well? How is that end of the market changing?
First of all, I'm glad to be here, so thank you. Thank you for pulling us together. I think, to your point on how customer conversations shaping up, I think there are two tracks, or there are two types of conversations that are going on, and I call them the numerator or the denominator conversation. The denominator conversation is exactly what you said, which is cost optimization and how do we become more resilient and make sure that the cost structure is ready for scale up or scale down, given the volatility around us. But the more exciting ones are the numerator conversation, which is how do we think about top line impact using technology, especially AI now. And I know AI is the buzzword, everybody's talking about it, but how do you really look at generative AI? And if you look at this part of the world, right, several SIs are here, large IT services players, several GCCs. Generative AI and everything that we're seeing around us could be a really interesting unlock for them on the top line. How do they make man/woman plus machine more productive than just man or woman with machine, right? So I think lots of conversations there, and I think that's the exciting part. So both are going on. I'm personally more excited about the numerator ones, so the top line conversations.
That's very good to hear. The top line conversations are more exciting than the bottom line ones as always. But that's a question that I want to put to Sandip as well. In terms of the custodians of these changes, what are tech companies doing internally to make sure that they're resilient to this entire change that we are seeing in terms of headwinds? And also, you have a duty to your customers as well, in the sense that they not only have to be ready to weather these global headwinds, but more importantly, be a step ahead of that. What are you doing with respect to that?
So look, I think technology in many respects has always served as a deflationary force, right, in whatever environment we look at. So I think as custodians of technological advancements and others, I think it behooves us to pretty much eat our own cooking in some respects. And I think in many respects, I can speak for my organization, we have always prided ourselves in doing that. So for example, Puneet just talked about the whole wave of AI, generative AI and so on. We've actually, as we have driven the advancement in that technology through our What's Next platform and so on, we've actually adopted it ourselves right up front. So today, I think almost 90+% of our HR, what used to be manual transactions, they are enabled through What's Next, through generative AI, through an application called Ask HR. And it's having a it's making a phenomenal difference in terms of how the denominator part of the conversation is working. So that's one part of it. The second thing is, I think as we look around the world and we start to see supply chains, there are clearly some issues that we are seeing in the global supply chains and others. How do you enable that with technology? So, with things which I think we've enabled using blockchain technology, for example, to create less friction and create more transparency and trust in some of the supply chains that, whether it be food trust that drives a lot of grocery supply chains, or shipping supply chains, which we are doing through another sort of consortia and whatnot. Those are, again, proof points that help in two ways. One, it actually helps you validate how technology can weather these supply chain issues, number one. Number two, it creates proof points for clients to actually feel comfortable in adopting these technologies when they see the likes of us, putting it to use, right?
Fair enough. So eating your own cookie, but over the last couple of years, the pace of disruption has actually increased, right? There's just wave of new technology that keeps on coming. And, a couple of years ago, it was all about metaverse. Now it's all about Gen AI. That's the buzzword in town. How do you, weed out as to what's going to be relevant 5 years from here on versus something which is a bit more transitory, a bit more, pilot in nature? How do you make those decisions? Because you'll have to calculate how much investment do you want to put behind those technologies, right?
I guess the question is, yeah, right, Anisha. No, I think it's a great question, and I always go back to what I tell people, right? Technologies come and go, but it's important that we always keep in mind what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, right? What is the value that you're getting to with your clients? And I think you heard it today morning from Professor Feifei as well, where she said, yes, I mean, indeed, there's no doubt generative AI is a transformative, disruptive technology, but really it is how are you using it for getting to the outcomes that we're trying to reach. Like you mentioned metaverse, right? I mean, a couple of years back, that was a big buzz, and everybody was going around looking for those POC use cases. What do we do with it? But I still remember the coolest use case that came out was during the pandemic with the metaverse. I still remember because just putting on the hat of SAP. I mean, we have every year close to 3,000 people joining us, and it's very important that we wanted to give each one the same experience of what it would be, even if we were onboarding them during the non-pandemic times. And it was that time that the real use case of the metaverse was born, at least for the employee onboarding, where very quickly we built that use case because that was what we were trying to achieve. The technology was more the enabler of that outcome, right? And today, even today, because we can't scale with the numbers, so we use that to bring in a person. They can even talk to our CEO. There's conversations that are, of course, brought into the metaverse. So it's really what is the value we are trying to achieve. Every employee has that personalized experience. Metaverse comes to the rescue. Similarly, I'd say, I think very important going back to the drawing board, given that you're solving for the large, mid-sized, small companies out there, each one having a different threshold of where they want to go for the, what did you say, the numerator versus the, whether it's just about automation and speed and all of that, or do you think about top line growth? And it's really based on that these technologies come into play. And then you need to, of course, secondly, build out that foundation in your organization to help you to scale. Because clearly in these times of generative AI, but it's very clear that if you don't scale your ecosystem around you, then those outcomes you can't reach, no matter which part of the spectrum you're trying to get to, that you need to get that whole ecosystem with you to kind of drive that forward. So it's multifold. Don't go for technology's sake. Once you decide on one, it's also about scale on how do you bring everybody together to drive at that, right?
And Anisha, if I can just add to that a little bit, you just triggered a great thought when you talked about metaverse, for example. So this ties back to the earlier question and this question together. But I think as custodians of technological advancements and whatnot, I think it's also incumbent on us to make sure that people understand what these technologies are all about, what they can do, what they can't do, and I think create a better awareness of what the technologies are all about. I'll give you a very sort of humorous example, but a client of mine recently was telling me that he had to walk out of one of the G20 summits because he was in this summit and a very senior academician got up on stage and he made the point that, oh, I've been using Metaverse for 20 years now. And so this gentleman, he said, I had to walk out because he said, then I have to figure out what I respond to from my, other executives who are going to say, if people are using it for 20 years, why aren't we using it right now? Right? So that becomes, it's a matter of responsibility, right? And how are we educating, I think, the broader populace, enterprises, clients, on what these technologies can do and actually really focusing on the outcomes. So I think it's something to keep in perspective.
Clearly, that guy was living in the future, I guess, already 20 years ago if they were already in metaverse. But generative AI, since that's a buzzword, Puneet, what is the reality of Gen AI? Because he very correctly pointed out that it's important to understand the adaptability of it as well and the real life uses of that. What do you think the reality of Gen AI is likely to be?
I think I said this yesterday at some forum, which is a lot of people say it's hyped. I disagree with them. I don't think it's hyped enough. My personal
You're hyped? That's what you're saying?
My personal take, and I'll tell you why, right? I think Sandip said this very well. As custodians, it's our job to make sure that we simplify technology and make sure everybody understands what it can do and what it can't do. But if you look at Gen AI, right, a lot of people ask me what has really shifted. It's been there for a while behind Netflix and behind maps and all of that, but there are two things that have really shifted this time. One is this natural user interface. Right? All our lives we've been trying to learn the language of computers. My kids kicked me because I was teaching them coding. They're like, listen, we wasted our time. Now computers have learned our language, which is okay, but computers are very quickly also learning the language of science. And they're learning chemistry and they're learning physics and they're learning biology. Biology is probably the most complex. But you will see with this natural user interface, like there are 30 million developers in the world today who can code, who can build something. Imagine if there are a billion developers in the world. Imagine if there are a billion Indians who can code with using natural language, right? So that's a massive shift. The other thing is this reasoning engine. And you can call it large language models or small language models. I heard the last week, tiny language models which can work on your mobile. Leave that aside. But if you look at the history of tech, all we've done is digitize things. People, places, events. But we never had the reasoning engine to make sense of those patterns beyond the human mind. But now with these models, you can really connect the dots. And that has real implications. I'll give you three quick ones. The first is I generally think my kids will not search anymore. We're moving from search to conversations. And it's a real, these are not chat llamas anymore. These are really evolved engines that can reason with you. The second is we'll move from conversations to intelligence very quickly. And we're seeing that already. The cost of intelligence is coming down. With these co-pilots that everybody's now talking about, if you have a co-pilot for a doctor, a first-year doctor can be as effective as a 10th-year doctor. Early tenured lawyer can be as effective as a more tenured lawyer because you can get them expertise and information on intelligence on their fingertips, right? I think that's a really interesting one. And then the third is when magic will happen when you move from intelligence to agency, when these agents can act on your behalf and actually do things, right? So rather than just reminding me it's your birthday, they can send flowers on my behalf without me knowing. And that's when magic will really happen. So conversation, intelligence, and agency. And that's why I think it's not hyped enough. It's early, it's just a year into its evolution. But it'll move really, really fast.
I like how you brought that point of sending flowers on the birthday. You've missed something really recently and facing the brunt of it yet. I don't know whether it'll be able to help you with that or not, but you talked about these agency of changes. But the most important capital for a tech company is intellectual capital, right? The talent. And Sindhu, I wanted to bring you into the conversation in this. How do you ensure the legacy workforce that you have is up to date with all of these new techs? They're able to reskill at that pace because things are moving really, really fast.
First of all, Anisha, there's nothing called legacy workforce, right? I mean, we pride in the fact that we take every employee as a core piece of the entire, how would you call it? The value chain? Family, I would say, right? But you bring up also a very important point, and you talked about the disruptive nature of Gen AI, and fully agree with you. But at the core of it, Anisha, I think it's very important that you also build foundational skills in people. What do I mean by this? When I talk about foundational skills, these are also repeatable skills, because it's very important that you look at things. How do you solve things? How do you solve for a problem? how do you make sure that you are able to tell a story? I mean, today in the world of generative AI, it's all about how do you look at data? How do you find those insights from the data? So in that context, a foundational skill is really about understanding that domain, understanding what the data is telling you, telling a story around that data. And that's a foundational skill that can be applied in any, no matter which technology, right? So for us, at the core of everything we do, we make sure that because we have all ranges, people right out of university, people with experience, people in the organization for a couple of years, lateral hires that we have. So it becomes very important that cross-generational diversity that we have, we bring people in different teams who can have that core foundational skills, and no matter which part of the portfolio that they're working in, they're able to apply those very analytical skills to the problems that they're trying to solve, right? And if you look at the nature of our business, I mean, today 98 of the top 100 companies in the world run on SAP, which means we take a lot of responsibility and pride in what we do. So the people who are building those products and taking it to market across domains need to have that understanding of, hey, if something fails, my supply chain is going to be impacted, or my workforce for large companies is going to be impacted, or my lead to cash process is going to be impacted, or I'm going to have an issue in my sourcing or in my procurement, which means they need to have the domain expertise. And what we also do, Anisha, is we engage a lot with academia, right? So for example, and we also believe leaders who drive teams forward have to take that front runner seat to make sure that they understand tech, understand the nuances of what it is, so that they can build up their teams as well accordingly, right? So for example, giving you one concrete piece with Triple ITB, what we do is we have very deep 16-month-long programs where, I mean, and this people are not stepping out of their work, right? They are using their weekends, extended hours to make sure that they go through that course, and which is all focused on machine learning, data science, like I said, really going to the core of that foundational skills, building that up, and really acting as multipliers for their teams, because it will take time till everybody in the organization goes through it. So it's a continuous, right? So no legacy workforce, really building up foundational skills, very key, because when you think about how do you solve problems in a very, we call it design thinking, but that's more details, but having those skills is key, and then leveraging also the ecosystem around us, our partners, the academia, other corporates also, because we learn from each other. There's always great things that happen in other organizations, and that mode of continuous learning becomes super important.
I could just add to that, and you see the three of us can tackle. So, but I love what you said on foundational skills, right? But just two quick things. One, I think, and I say this to my teams, the opposite of knowledge on AI is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. Several of us feel that we figured this out. None of us have figured this out. So I think it requires a lot of intellectual humility, to your point, to learn, right? And it doesn't matter what level you're in, what role you're in, you've got to learn this every day, otherwise this is going to move ahead of you and you'll have to catch up. The second is the learning curve on this technology is not that steep. Right? I started coding 25 years ago, and I remember C, C++. The first book I read was Letter C. It was a funny name. But coding was tough 25 years ago. This is not that tough. The learning curve is not that steep. So you better start learning. There's no excuse for not learning on this one, is my only suggestion.
Yeah, and I think this point around foundational skills, I'm glad you brought that up, Sindhu, because I think irrespective of any technological evolution, some of these foundational skills will never change. One of the things, I'm glad you brought it up, because we've actually seen it work. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we started infusing AI curriculum. So we offered an AI curriculum to the CBSE board, right? So kids from 10 through 12, 9 through 12, I think, they were offered this curriculum as an elective. And it was an experiment. We did it through the AICTE and others. And it worked brilliantly. It worked brilliantly because it actually gave an avenue for kids with that kind of a unique, problem-solving instinct to get into that kind of a elective curriculum. And I think my first year in this role, we had the first cohort that was graduating, and we offered internships to the top 20 um, folks that had done the pilot. So the best 20 pilots were given internships within IBM. I literally tell you, when I saw those readouts, I actually had tears in my eyes. That if we had this kind of option when we were going through ICSE or CBSE or whatever else we did, right? It just nurtured a different form of problem solving, foundational, even communication skills. How do you present? How do you get those soft skills? I think those are so important today, irrespective of whatever you do in your core skills and technical skills and so on. The ability to socially connect with the audience and folks that are going to be consumers of your technology, that itself is so important. Something to keep in perspective, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, I'm sure the consumer of our discussion today are clearly riveted by the conversation. But because of the paucity of time, let me try and close it quickly and get the views from all of you. A question that hits close to heart is, what role is India going to play in this scenario of global headwinds, right? Because naysayers have always been saying that Indian IT is something which really follows, doesn't innovate, hasn't been true at all, but that's what has been the narrative. And of course, we've proven them wrong time and again, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. But what role do you think India can play? We can start with anyone and then you can tango.
So look, I'll start, and I just wanted to use some numbers, right? So if you just look at IT spending in India today, I mean, I've always believed that technology and just look at history. Technology in every inflationary environment has always worked as a deflationary force because it helps you get to better productivity, better enhancement of better automation and all the rest of it. But today when you look at, and I'm just going to use a Gartner report, when you look at the IT spending, it's estimated to record a double-digit growth of about 11+% in 2024. That will go up to about 183 billion, up from 125 billion last year, right? Now, during the year, IT spending worldwide, right, is which is supposed to be go to about 5 trillion, 6%. India is growing at twice that. So when you think about the speed at which India is growing, the innovation that India has already delivered with the advancements that we've seen with DPI and UPI and all the rest of it, and then you look at the demographic dividend that India has the potential for. If that demographic dividend can be appropriately scaled to make India the skill capital of the world, when you put those three things together, just think about the multiplier potential that India can deliver to the world. In really, forget being a deflationary force, but being a force that is there to reckon with in the world.
Absolutely spot on. You want to add?
I think Sandip said it very beautifully, and he even had all the numbers to back him off as well. But maybe two things, right? We talked about talent, we talked about market, and I think this is the unique combination. Today, it's not just about building from India for the world, it's building from India for also India, the market, right? What has changed phenomenally is that you have a fast-growing market right here, and just with the demography that we have here, right? If you're able to solve it at this scale, you can solve it anywhere. I mean, language was one of the topics that was brought up multiple times. I mean, hey, come on, which country has the breadth of the languages that we solve with Gen AI? So if you think about one problem like multilinguality in your large language models, just to your point, think about the use cases that we have here. Of course, we have Bhashini and the likes, but multilinguality in large language models, just think about scaling here in India. Phenomenal. So,
listen, I think just to build on what Sindhu and Sandip said, hand on my heart, India today is one of the most exciting markets in the world for tech, right? Just no doubt about it. And whatever lens you take it in, I take three lenses: demand, supply, impact on the world. look at demand, 6,000 listed companies, 60 million SMBs, third largest startup ecosystem in the world. We can go on with numbers, but there is no market like India today with the diversity and the breadth of what we have. Look at supply, every sixth AI developers coming out of India, every fourth AI project on GitHub's coming out of India. I could go on 200,000 plus computer science graduates a year. Just from a supply perspective, we're ready now, and we're going to hit at our weight. And finally, impact on the world. I mean, you spoke about DPI, DPG. 25% of the incremental workforce over the next decade will come from India. Now, that's not impact on the world. What is, right? So whatever lens you take, India is truly, and I'm going to quote Devjani, who's sitting right in front of me, India is inevitable. And I think we all believe in that. There is no reason why India is not going to lift its weight across demand, supply, and then impact on the world. Very excited to be here.
Yes, and I think that completely sums it up. India is inevitable, and that's what's been shown time and again as well. But thank you so much, everyone. Would have loved to take the conversation forward, but I think there's a bit of a paucity of time. Thanks, Sandip, Sindhu, as well as Puneet for making time and speaking with us. And thank you so much for being with us here.